So I hear there's been quite a bit of commotion down in Cape Town with respect to unlawful occupation and resisting it. And do you want to tell us a little bit more?
Yes, so remember the reason why we actually started the Property Law Alliance was in the beginning of lockdown, and when COVID, remember when it was still the coronavirus before we actually had the term or the name COVID. But anyway, there was this group of people that came out that pushed back against evictions, and this is nothing new, I suppose, for us as eviction attorneys. There's always some of the other group that's like anti-eviction and anti-everything, which is a bit of a problem. And I mean, that's why we started the Property Law Alliance, to give the true answers and the actual law. And I think it's one of those situations again. So for so many years, I've seen these groups that push against evictions, and it really makes me sad. And for the benefit of our viewers as well, the reason why it makes me sad is people in South Africa is struggling with a very slow, very, very sad situation with regards to our economy. We would have liked to see a much stronger rand. We would love to see a stronger economy, and we don't have that. And it's easy enough to fall into the trap of thinking, yes, but remember, it's because of the war, it's because of COVID, it's because of this, that, and the other. But the truth is, this has been the case since 2008. We've been in an economic unfortunate situation, and even slightly before that. And the country's history is of such a nature that we've never really been in a situation where we thought, oh, wow, look at this amazing economic situation. But why that's relevant for me is one of the biggest sectors that can have the biggest impact on a country's economy is the property market, is the property industry. And what's very relevant in the context of evictions is, unless we can do evictions effectively and properly, we won't be able to fix our economy. So if we are talking about I'm so sorry, there is a little puppy that's going to hop up here. But if we talk about a country's economy, and
that's not a little puppy.
he just wants to be party to this conversation. Apologies to our viewers. There's no way I'm going to fight this man out of this conversation. But if we talk about economies, and we are trying to say we shouldn't evict people because shame, people won't have a place to stay, or it will have a negative impact on them. Yes, very true, even Odin agrees with me. Very true, it will have a negative impact on that person. But if we don't do it properly, we will have a permanent issue around property and poverty in South Africa, because we need to start fixing the problem at the root. And the root of the problem is we don't have international investors. And even our local investors are very skittish when it comes to rental housing. Now, the true solution to getting people out of horrible accommodation, we don't want people to be living in shacks, not because it's unsightly or something. We don't want people to be living in shacks because it's inhumane. It's not okay for somebody to live like that when it's cold, when it rains, whatever. It's not okay that we have citizens in South Africa living like that. But if we do evictions more effectively, more efficiently, and we can imagine a situation, Bruno, where we can get international investors investing in low-cost rental accommodation. That's the solution. Now, these groups are coming out and they are saying things like, we will help you to oppose your eviction. The truth of the matter is, that's not helping anybody, because if somebody is the legal owner of a property and the person in occupation is in illegal occupation, he will be evicted. It might take a bit longer if you follow these processes, but the problem is that person that's now delaying the inevitable eviction is running up a bigger damages claim against the landlord. And eventually he's going to be evicted. And eventually he's also going to be left with much higher legal fees that he has to pay for himself as well as for the other party. And he's going to be left with a damages claim. So the truth is, these organizations that supposedly helping people, really, I wish the message gets out there properly that they are in fact not helping. What they are in fact doing is they're not just helping the poor person that already has to go through something bad. It's not pleasant. I can't imagine it being pleasant to be evicted, but it's gonna happen. It cannot not happen. And so the problem is it's doing more harm than good, Bruno. And I really, the older I get, the more I realize I really come in with a heart for both sides of the conversation on evictions. And when I say it's really not helping, it's not because we typically act on behalf of landlords and we typically do the evictions. It's really because I can see what it does to an illegal occupant to spend all that money on defending the matter and still get evicted and at the end. And it's really a heartbreaking situation. So I don't think anybody is helping in that situation.
Yeah, and but it's so funny you say that, because I've always carried a very similar perception, and unfortunately, and I mean, this isn't your opinion, it's only my opinion, so don't worry. It's but like I do feel to a certain degree the legislation doesn't properly cater for the real scenario that we need to deal with, right? And the reason I say this is you brought economics into the picture, saying, listen, our country's economics are run in a certain way. It'd be great to get foreign investments. Now, what people don't understand is there's a circular argument behind this. And this goes back to that supply and demand concept, right? Now, if I stay in a property and the landlord is more easily able to evict me. Now, I'm not saying in a bad way. All I'm really trying to say is that you don't pay rent. Yes, he has to follow due process, but even the current due process, I think, is already putting people off, right?
Yes.
So if it was even easier than it is now, and the legislation was adapted for tenants. So again, we don't have to deal with every sort of unlawful occupier. And I think that was always my problem, is when PI was initially introduced, the idea was to focus on people without housing, squatters, and especially rural areas, not necessarily in your urban areas. And then it started getting used for tenanted spaces. There was an argument whether it should, whether it shouldn't, whether it should be used for foreclosures. And eventually, just started applying across the board, right? And no one changed it. The idea now was everyone falls under. The problem with this is that it creates quite a level of delay, and our court system already creates quite a level of delay, right? And so now it's a compounded effect. We've got a court system that takes months to give us dates, compounded by the fact that the legislation requires us to do extra things. And the legislation itself is actually fine if you think about it. If we were able to get dates and issue the application, wait for a response, set it down immediately, get a directive, and 2 weeks later you're in court, you could do an eviction in a month and a half. Anyway, all right, so that's problem number one. That already creates the problem, and that's a systemic problem. Now, economically, we're creating our own problems, because you as a tenant think, I'm going to resist because I'm struggling to get accommodation, so I'm going to resist. What you don't realize is now landlords, knowing of this difficulty, are resisting certain tenants from taking occupation of the property. So the more the problem persists, the more resistance you're going to get on both sides. So by you making it difficult for a landlord to be able to swap tenants around, it's the same as the employment argument. And I've said this for years. The problem with employment here is I don't want to hire for fear sometimes that you hire, probation of 3 months goes by, and now you have to follow this massive route that might lead you to the CCMA and all of that. So what do a lot of people do? See, us as lawyers, we're still a bit more comfortable because we've got some level of knowledge when it comes to the law. We don't have to pay people to do it for us. But think about your small business owner. He's now scared of hiring because he knows to fire is such a mission. So what does he do? He'd rather not deal with the stress.
Yes.
And I've spoken to people keep doing this, like they have HR issues, they can't find someone that works for them. Each one of them is always a problem. Then they lay complaints and this happens, so they don't hire. So what happens to our economy? Yeah, we don't have jobs.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the same. Why do people not buy properties? Because it's so difficult to get rid of tenants. Why is it so difficult to get rid of tenants? Because the tenants unfortunately compound the issue by making it difficult to get rid of them. And by virtue of this, they now can't find accommodation because no one's willing to buy properties. And those that are willing to buy properties are very conservative on who they allow in the properties. So you're basically creating problems for yourselves. And this sort of non-compliance, it's anti-evictions. It's not anti-evictions, it's anti-law, it's anti-rent, it's anti-leasing. But then please explain to us, maybe from the outset, why enter into a lease to begin with? Then why make it then, you want to fight the system. This isn't legal advice, but you want to fight the system, fight the government system. But now the private landlord enters into an agreement with you where you agree to do X, and now you go, I'm not going to do X anymore.
Yes.
I cannot fathom how that makes sense. You're not helping anyone. In fact, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting people like you that are struggling to find housing. So I mean, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah, and I really do agree with you, and I know the legislator agrees with you. In this, if we look at the 2005 published amendment to PI that was never promulgated to this day, where specifically rentals and sales, evictions on the back of rentals and sales, are excluded from the ambit of PI. Now, that piece of legislation, that amendment, was obviously never promulgated, which is why it still forms part of that. But the truth is, it doesn't really make sense, to your point, to take occupation and agree to pay rent. You can't stop paying rent later and be like, oh my goodness, but now people are nasty with me because they're evicting me. I agreed to do something. Now I don't want to do it, but I don't want to allow the other party to enforce their rights. I agree with you. It's a very interesting situation. But yeah, I think our message is pretty clear.
Yeah.
We're in terms of the Rental Housing Act, I mean, government is actually compelled to do everything in their power to promote rental housing. And I think it's dangerous if people don't realize this. The push against evictions is doing the exact opposite than what they want to achieve. So
less supply. It causes
exactly.
less supply. Simple.
It's ridiculous though.